"Now," he said. "Let's see if you die." Machine gun-toting border guards in Venezuela thought I was a cocaine mule. In the wake of the death of my first relationship, I decided to do the normal, rational thing to get over it. I moved to Mexico, got hit by a car, recovered, and then moved to Colombia, where I fell madly in love with a girl from the city of Bucaramanga, a city which, to this day, makes me smile at its unusual moniker. At one point, however, I received an invitation from a friend in the nearby Venezuelan city of San Cristobal to come visit for a few days. Given that my girlfriend was otherwise occupied with her working life, I decided to venture off into the unknown, where she would later meet me once her current obligations were complete. The Venezuelan border lay just beyond a small Colombian city called Cucuta. I knew nothing about Cucuta. I didn't know anyone in Cucuta. I did, however, think it had a funny name, and thankfully, it was a mere 120 miles away, easily reachable by bus. It should take no time at all. I hadn't expected how grueling the journey would be. Not only was I far too large to sit comfortably in the bus, the seat in front of me was so close that it prevented me from sitting with my legs straight. But the bus was so overloaded I was forced to buy 2 seats to properly fit. Wedged in uncomfortably, I discovered that the lack of airflow, coupled with the tropical heat, produced a never-ending stream of sweat that gushed down my face and neck. This was exacerbated by the addition of several passengers carrying chickens in strangely customized cases. The drive itself was equally horrible. The route shot straight through the Andes, over a harrowing road that twisted back and forth through the mountains like a snake struggling to release itself from a Gordian knot. I was repeatedly thrown back and forth, in turn bashing myself against the window and the unfortunate man and rooster seated next to me. Every few minutes, I would glance down and see how we were careening at high speed on the edge of a cliff, only to be violently tossed the other way when another vehicle would come whipping down the mountain and miss us by mere inches. I've never been a religious man, but I believe that day I prayed to the god of buses. All said and done, it took an incredible 6 hours to drive the 120 miles and arrive at the central bus station in Cucuta, which was foreseeably small and unimpressive. It was there that I needed to hire a taxi and drive the remaining 30 minutes across the border to San Cristobal. I found a taxi, hopped in, and said to take me to the Colombia-Venezuela border. The area was rather deserted, and in order to leave, I had to enter a small government office and get my passport stamped with an exit visa, Casablanca style. I walked up to the counter and the man behind it took my passport. He was about to stamp it when he paused and looked at me, visibly irritated. "Your visa has expired. You've overstayed your time here by 5 days. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait until morning and go into the office in town to get this settled." I looked around. I was in the middle of nowhere in a town called Cucuta, with my friends waiting in San Cristobal. I tried a different tactic. "Isn't there some sort of fine I could pay?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "Well, isn't there some kind of fine I could pay you?" He looked less annoyed. "Oh, what kind of fine were you thinking of?" I pulled out my wallet and was about to check how much I had when he interrupted me. "Better check that in the bathroom." Well, at least we were both on the same page. I checked my funds and figured that a bribe of 80,000 pesos, or about $40, would probably do the trick. He seemed disappointed. "That's all you have?" "Yes, I'm sorry," I lied. Grumbling somewhat, he stamped my passport and I left, heading back toward the waiting taxi. Next stop was a military checkpoint. These were quite routine in Colombia, and I was used to them suddenly appearing on the intercity roadways. I'd only had one unfortunate encounter with them, in which the sudden appearance of soldiers on the highway interrupted an enjoyable session of roadhead that I had been receiving. I instinctively braked harder than usual, and the girl sat up rapidly while I struggled to pull on my pants. Regrettably, I was unable to lower my level of arousal sufficiently in the seconds I had before I was stopped, and when I was searched a moment later by one of the soldiers, there was an awkward moment as he inadvertently cupped my tumescence. Luckily, I had no such problem this time. I stepped out of the taxi and brought my luggage over to be inspected, and they began systematically examining all my belongings. It was then that they found it. Cocaine in Bucaramanga is sold in small tubes, with miniature corks plugging them. During the festivities of the night before, in which some 30 people had been partying it up in my girlfriend's apartment, One of these empty vials had somehow ended up in my toiletry bag in the bathroom, where I had left it out. I'm neither going to confirm nor deny whether this had been me. So, for the sake of argument, let's say that it was teleported there by magic. It was this empty vial that one of the soldiers now proudly produced out of my empty suitcase. I was escorted to the senior officer, whose rank I could not identify, so for now, let's just assume he was the top general in whichever country I was now in. "What is this?" he said. "I don't know. I think I know what this is." "What do you think it is?" "I think you know what it is. It looks like a tube." "Yes," he said, "but it has a residue in it. You know what I think this is? I think this is cocaine." He touched a finger to it, then tapped the tip of his tongue and smiled an evil smile. I said the only thing I could think of. "Oh, give me your passport," he said. He flipped through it until he found my Colombian visa, the stamp which I had just received by bribing the official not 30 minutes before. "So, you arrive in Colombia, then you come to Venezuela the same day?" Shit. My proud moment of bribing my way out of Colombia would now serve to paint me as a border-hopping drug smuggler. I figured it was a good time to figure out where I was. "Am I in Venezuela?" He looked unimpressed. "Yes, you are in Venezuela. Now why would you do such a thing? You know what I think?" I didn't know, but I doubted he was about to invite me to his birthday party. "I think you are transporting drugs into Venezuela. Do you consume drugs?" he asked. "No," I lied. "I think you do. Let me ask you this, can you drink coffee?" I wondered if this was a trick question. Yes." "Can you drink Coca-Cola?" he continued. "Sure." I was confused. With a snap of his fingers, one of the soldiers stepped forward with a can of Coke. I accepted it and looked at the head general of Venezuela, unsure of how to proceed. "If you can, open that and drink it," he ordered. I nervously looked at the machine guns bristling around me, popped the tab, and took a huge gulp while the general sat and watched, a grin spreading across his face. "Now," he said, "let's see if you die." I froze. The hell had I just drunk? "What do you mean?" I asked in a panic. The general was clearly enjoying this. He sat there for a moment, just grinning before answering. "What? Nobody explained this to you?" "Nobody explained what to me?" "That if you swallow balloons with drugs in them, that drinking caffeine will cause a chemical reaction in your stomach that will produce acid, resulting in the balloons bursting and your death." Since I wasn't actually a drug mule, I began to relax, the fight-or-flight reflex letting slip its firm grasp over my sanity. "That's it? There's nothing in this drink otherwise?" "Of course not," he said. "We're not animals." For the next hour, I sat there while the general would alternate between examining my passport and repeatedly asking me if I consumed drugs and if I was transporting them. I followed the universal rule I had learned from Latin men when confronted by their jealous women: deny, deny, deny. Still, it was clear that this was going nowhere, and I realized there was only one way out of this predicament. "Isn't there some kind of fine I could pay?" I was clearly finally speaking his language, and I was metaphorically back in the bathroom at the border. "How much were you thinking?" he asked. I assumed that the discovery of drug paraphernalia in my luggage and the presence of assault weaponry somewhat weakened my bargaining position. I would have to offer more than $40. Unfortunately, I had only $30 left in my wallet. "I'm going to need to visit an ATM," I said. "How much can you get?" "Well, my daily limit is low. I can only withdraw $100 a day." I lied blatantly. I sincerely hoped he was not familiar with North American banking practices. Again, my bribes were disappointing. "That's really all you can get?" I shrugged and tried to look poor. Finally, he relented, and I was walked over to a waiting Humvee with several soldiers. We drove over to an ATM, and I hopped out with one of them, who escorted me to the machine. I withdrew the equivalent of $100 and handed it over to the soldier, who silently nodded and walked away. My taxi, which had been patiently waiting throughout the whole ordeal, drove over to pick me up. I climbed in, and the driver just shook his head for a good 5 minutes as we climbed into the mountains before he began to make small talk with me. The conversation was light and pleasant for the most part. My opinion of Colombia and Venezuela, my travel stories, my apparent difficulty in crossing borders. Then he asked something that made me nervous. So tell me about your parents. What does your father do? I looked out the car window into the blackness that was the Andes at night and realized there was no way I could answer that question honestly. My parents are fairly well off, and I was at the cab driver's mercy. In the unlikely event that he was involved in kidnapping in any way, my next words would determine my value as a victim. I did the only thing I could have done given the circumstances. I killed my parents. They're dead, I said. They died in a car accident when I was 6 months old. I never knew them. All my life I've been alone, barely making ends meet and taking odd jobs here and there. One day I hope to find a place where I feel like I actually fit in. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, he said. Any siblings? Well, I was already on a roll. I had 2 sisters, but they also died. In fact, everyone in my family except me is dead. All dead. And, I work as a waiter. After that, we just talked about soccer. When we reached the bus station in San Cristobal, my friends picked me up. I was beyond relieved to see them. I had just endured a terrifying trip in a bus of death through the mountains, bribed a border guard, been caught with cocaine residue at the Venezuelan border, thought I was about to die from poisoning, bribed another officer, escorted by armed guards to an ATM in Venezuela, and figuratively killed my parents in the mountains. Did you have a good trip? They asked. Sure did, I said. A guy gave me a free Coke. No, there's nothing wrong with the radio. She's going to kill us. Help us out. Once, it took me 24 hours to get from Milwaukee to Minneapolis. I was on a broke college spring break to see some friends in Milwaukee, and I took a $1 megabus to get there. After a lot of fun over the long weekend, which included taking acid the day before and literally walking around the entire city of Milwaukee, it was Sunday morning, and we had to get back home. The hangover from the night before hadn't gone away, and I still felt high and drunk. The bus was leaving from the Greyhound station at 7:30, so we thought getting to the city bus stop by 7 would give us plenty of time. So we headed down and got on the bus. All was fine until we hit traffic. We were late, but not too late. So we weren't too worried, especially since the bus I took out there was 2 hours late leaving. At about 7:15, a lady in a motorized scooter got on. Secretly, everyone was thinking, "Oh great, now we're all going to be late." But we remained cordial about it. She was trying to park the thing and get it locked in, but for the life of her, she could not do it. It really looked like the Austin Powers scene in the tunnel. Finally, after, not exaggerating, 5 minutes of trying to get it hooked in with the driver and everyone watching and trying to help, she stands up out of the scooter and sits in a normal seat. I was infuriated, but at least we were on the way. Time was moving much too quickly at this point. 7:25, 7:26. Finally, 7:30 hit, and we thought we were at our stop. But due to construction, we were actually a block and a half away. We started running towards the now in sight bus, and like a movie, it pulled away literally seconds before we got to the station. Wow, this really sucks. If only that lady had gotten off 2 minutes early. If only we had been at the city bus stop at 6:45 or 6:55 even. Well, that's the beginning. So we were stuck at Milwaukee Greyhound Station and couldn't afford the $60 one-way ticket on Greyhound or the $110 Amtrak tickets. So we checked on the megabus again, and there was one coming in 4 hours for $18 each. That was most of my money, and we started to wait for the bus. The bus showed up 3 hours late, and we got on. Passengers were getting off saying, "Good luck, dudes," and I wouldn't get on that bus. But we figured, how bad could it be? First of all, there was a serious racial tension on the bus. Everyone on the top was from Milwaukee and was white, and everyone on the bottom was from Chicago and was black. Seriously though, I mean everyone on the bus. Which was weird but wasn't a big deal until later. Also, the bus driver said they didn't have room for my bags underneath, so I had to hold them by my feet. But the worst thing by far was the driver. Apparently, the original driver that came from Chicago had gotten out of his bus in the middle of the city and punched a cab driver in the face, which is why they were late. The lady they replaced him with was a completely incompetent specimen. The whole ride, she had Tyler Perry on full volume, the heat blasting full on. Honestly, it was like 83 degrees on that bus. And all the inside cabin lights on. So there was literally no sleeping going to happen. We finally got on the road and stopped in a suburb just outside of MKE for a quick minute, for gas. I didn't get off the bus, and most other people didn't either. She didn't pump any gas, and I saw her letting one of her friends on the bus. She literally stopped in a suburb on the way to pick up her friend. On the way out of the gas station, she hit the overhang with the top of the bus, sparks and everything. So we were driving along, and it finally seemed like it was going to be okay. I was starting to drift asleep, and I felt a thump like someone threw a snowball at us. I looked out the window and saw a traffic cone flying through the air. She was starting to drift asleep, so she pulled over and said, "She's tired and she needs a break. She has been on her third shift in a row and has been up for 2 days." I was really freaking out at this point. What sort of company would put someone in charge of customers' lives on a 24-hour shift without so much as a rest? And then, while we were pulled onto the shoulder, a cop rolled up. She told everyone to be cool, and she'd handle it, but she left the mic on, so the whole bus could hear her. She started to tell the cop that her radio wasn't working, and she was trying to contact dispatch. The cop said, "Well, you can't pull over here, and you'll have to move on." She started to tell the cop about how the bus was totally fine, and so was she, except for the radio. Mind you, all of us upstairs were upset, tired, cranky, and for the most part scared. She had just hit a gas station, a traffic cone, said that she wasn't sure if she could get there because she was tired, and now she was lying to this cop? So one of the college kids that was also upstairs ran down and told the cop, "No, there's nothing wrong with the radio. She's going to kill us. Help us out." So the cop forced us to pull off in Toma so we could wait for a new driver. And while we were on the way, race warfare almost erupted. A very loud and upset black man came upstairs and started yelling at us to be cool and quit snitching and things like that. And we started yelling back, "She could have killed us, man. I don't want to die." Then he started in with the race stuff. "Y'all don't understand what it's like to have a job and need to get home, blah, blah, blah," and started cussing us out. We, like whiny white losers, started saying great comebacks like, "Yeah, we do, and we have school." Luckily, one of his fellow steerage travelers talked him down because there were kids on the bus. But it was tense. Maybe the boldest race card play in casual life. When we got to Toma, I got out for a breakfast sandwich at McDonald's and went back on the bus. It was perfect sleeping time. No people, no Tyler Perry, no heat, and no lights. Mind you, I had taken like 4 hits of acid the day before, and I barely slept at all the night before this. So it was hard, but I finally got to sleep. I woke up and we were moving. There were 3 things wrong. There was still Tyler Perry and the lights and heat on full blast when the bus was on. There were literally half the people that were on it when we got there. I could still hear that lady talking to the upset black man. It's the same crazy bitch. Too late for me, though. We were on the way. The story pretty much ends here as the lady is somewhat capable after what I find out was her taking a nap. They literally pulled over for her to sleep in a motel for 2 hours and sent her back on the bus when the cop left. But as we pulled into Minneapolis, she said, "I don't know how to get there. Will someone direct me?" over the loudspeaker. I was astounded. It's one road the whole way until you exit. Anyway, we got off way early by lying about where the stop was so we didn't have to be near her anymore. Then, my friend's dad brought us to Perkins. I had a chicken tender melt because it was 10:30 in the morning, and I'd already had breakfast at 4. Maybe they didn't notice the guys carrying weapons lining the runway and the anti-aircraft guns all over the place. Over Christmas holidays in 1996 or 1997, can't recall exactly, I was traveling with my family on a cruise around the Caribbean. One of the stops was Guatemala, which had been caught up in a civil war for decades. Still, there were all kinds of assurances it was safe now, so very few people were concerned. One of the excursions offered was an all-day trip, 12 hours, to Tikal to see the Mayan ruins. I'd previously taken a couple of anthropology classes in college, taught by a renowned Mayan scholar who had been part of the excavation, so I couldn't resist the opportunity to see them for myself. I booked the day trip by myself. My family made other plans. The tour ended up being a small group, maybe 20 of us in total, from the cruise ship. We were to take a chartered flight from the coast, and then a bus to the ruins. We had a local guide and translator. It's all good, right? I consider myself a seasoned traveler, having been to several countries in Central America and Europe, so I wasn't all that concerned. Even so, I packed some extra cash and my pepper spray. This was before 9/11, so travel was a lot different and kept up situational awareness. So, at 7 a.m., my small group of white, privileged tourists, in my mid-20s at the time, I was the youngest by far, piled into a bus and headed off to the airport for our flight to the ruins. No one in the group was all that concerned, but I had alarms going off from the get-go. I wasn't chatting with the group, but was watching the world go by outside the window. We went through slums. Okay, this is a poor country. We went through several military checkpoints. Okay, there's been a civil war. We got to the airport. Really, a glorified landing strip, which was surrounded by the military. Oh shit. I keep my observations to myself, as no one else commented. Maybe they didn't notice the guys carrying weapons lining the runway and the anti-aircraft guns all over the place. Or the fact that besides our chartered plane, there were no other planes around except old military ones. We had to hand over our passports once we were on the plane, and one government official took them back to the hangar where they were passed around. I give myself a little talk, telling myself I'm overreacting. Things are cool. So what if I'm a young single woman traveling with strangers in a country that just signed a peace treaty? That's when I see our tour guide translator hand over a huge wad of US currency and get the nod to leave. Everyone settles in and we take off. 2 other planes take off right after us and escort us for a good bit before turning around and heading back. Well, okay then. The flight was uneventful, as was the bus ride to the ruins. I notice a lot more payments exchange hands between the various military government-looking folks along the way, along with the different locals that would stop the bus at different points. Meanwhile, I'm looking at my fellow tourists, and not a one has clued into all the goings-on. I start hanging out with the tour guide, Joe, and chatting with him in between stops and bribes. He's a really cool guy, had moved back to Guatemala after attending school in the US because of the peace treaty. I casually mention all the stops and he tells me to not worry. He's got things covered. And then he showed me his handgun under his jacket and the other guns and ammo in his backpack, along with a wad of US currency I'd only seen in movies during drug deals. And he told me that while I was pretty, I wasn't the blonde hot type that might get taken. Yeah, okay, I was cool, and never so glad to be a chubby plane chick. We got to Tikal, which was amazing, and more than I could have hoped for. A monkey decided to follow me around to steal the tie I had pulling my hair back. Nothing much happened, other than several of the group making a big deal about the heat. The fact they had to drink beer out of a bottle. Seriously, people, did they want to get a crippling case of diarrhea? And the food was authentic, and not the full spread they have on the ship. My God, tourists are the worst. The trip back was similar, except now it was getting dark, and not only us were on the bus. We had an escort for most of the way. According to Joe, the guide, they were local militia who wanted to make sure that the rich tourists were safe from the government military. Apparently, the military were the ones to worry about, as they were underpaid and liked to grab groups for ransom, rape, whatever. It seems this trip was a bit more expensive than usual, as there had been an incident before Christmas. Oh, joy. Joe and I chatted the whole way back, and he told me how impressed he was that I noticed how things were and how stupid all the others acted, being so clueless of their surroundings. He said he noticed 2 of them get pickpocketed, and he didn't say anything because they deserved it. He told me about growing up in Guatemala, being sent to family in America, and how he wanted to make Guatemala beautiful again. We got back to the landing strip, airport for our chartered flight back. Again, more exchanges for safety, and we were off. Again, we had escorts, this time on the plane with us. It was a little disconcerting to see machine guns casually propped up on the seat next to someone. All said and done, it was a great trip, and honestly, I doubt few would have noticed anything. But when you are a single white woman traveling alone, you learn to pay attention. And the things I saw on that trip were eye-opening, to say the least. I've never seen so many guns, so much money exchanged, and so many potentially iffy situations outside of movies. And yeah, I'm a sheltered American, so maybe this isn't all that scary or intense. For me, it was because it was such a stark contrast to the rest of the trip. The luxury of the cruise ship, the white privilege, the general cluelessness of what things are like locally. The experience changed me, hopefully for the better.